Most typewriters in the early 1900s were huge cast iron behemoths, but this one isn't. In 1912, Corona Typewriter Company, Inc. released what would become one of the most famous typewriters in history. Now, the story for the Corona 3 actually begins way back in 1903 with the precursor to this model, which is the standard folding typewriter. Now, the original standard folding typewriter was created by a man named Frank Rose, and his revolutionary design did not go unnoticed. In fact, his business was so great that in 1909, a man named Ben Conger would buy it and begin to work on a second generation. In 1909 and 1910, after the second generation was already released, a man named Otto Petermann was named as the head designer for what was going to be the next generation, the number 3. He redesigned the aluminum frame and made it more curvy and smaller, and in 1909 and 1910 applied for dozens and dozens of patents until in 1912 the Corona number 3 was ready to be launched. The advertising and marketing team at Corona was then tasked with selling a very unorthodox typewriter. In their advertisements, they made sure that customers knew that while the device was very light and very portable, it was also very productive, with all of the functionality that they would come to expect from a full-size office typewriter. They even marketed it in really fun colors like red and blue and green. The Model 3 was so successful that from the 6,000 sales of the first year in 1912 through its entire production, they had sold over 700,000 of these machines. So let's look at how this thing actually works. Now, you may be wondering why this is called a laptop from 1916, and the simple answer is because it actually folds down. The top bar where you actually type folds down on top of the keyboard so that it can fit in its neat little carrying case. It's a revolutionary design that continued to be used for decades. Now, the design is actually very clever. The typing wheel rests on top of two nickel-plated arms that are on two little pole things, and the arms fold over and carry the whole top with it. Adding to the portability was the very diminutive size of this machine. It's only about 1 foot by 6 inches. And the frame is entirely made out of aluminum, which means it's basically a MacBook Pro. Now let's talk about how this thing works. If we take a look inside the original instruction manual, you'll find all sorts of diagrams that point to crazy things and tons of different switches and levers. And quite frankly, we're not very interested in going in depth into every single one of those, so let's just look at the highlights. Now, because this is a portable typewriter, each key has 3 functions. You have a letter, a capital letter, and a symbol. In order to make use of all 3 of these layers on the actual keys themselves, the number 3 actually uses 2 different shift keys. In its resting position, the lowercase letters strike the typeface. If you press the caps lock button, the entire assembly actually moves up to allow the capital letters to strike the typeface. If you press the Fig button, which stands for figures, the whole assembly moves up even more to allow the symbols or numbers to strike the typeface. It's actually quite entertaining when you're typing to see this whole big assembly moving up and down every time you do a capital letter or a number or a punctuation mark even. Next to the figure key, you'll notice a little rocker. That actually serves 3 purposes. The first is actually the caps lock button. If you depress the capital letter shift key and then rock it up into place, it'll lock the assembly in that position, basically a caps lock button. The same thing applies for the figure button. It can lock it in punctuation and number mode for some reason. The third use is actually quite important because if you push the rocker into place without depressing either of the shift keys, it locks the assembly in place, which means when you go to fold it up, it's not going to lift off. You don't want your typing assembly to go flying away. Tucked away behind the assembly on top are 2 little stands that fold out. These are to support your paper, and it really just makes this whole thing look super cute. They have little antenna. Now, the carrying case for the Corona is actually very clever in itself. There are actually two little mounting plates inside the case that latch onto the typewriter when you put it in. And then, when those are in place, the case actually folds down, so you don't even have to take the typewriter out of the case at all if you want to use it. This typewriter was absolutely revolutionary, and versions of it continued to be made all the way until 1940, and that's just for the Model 3. So think about it this way. This typewriter was basically produced from 1912 all the way to 1940. That's 28 years. It really just is incredible that something like this could be relevant for 28 years. I mean, look at a computer from 28 years ago. You never see people using computers from 1988 ever. So I find it amazing that this typewriter continued to be in use for 28 years before they finally stopped producing it. Overall, the Corona 3 is an incredible little device, and even though over 700,000 of them exist, almost any collector would be happy to have one of these in their collection. I know for me personally, it's the perfect kind of typewriter because it's so light and portable that it can almost be a display item in your shelf. Heck, you could use this thing. Just texting my friends. LOL-OMG. There's no emojis. Where are the emojis? Now I know what they need to work on for the next model.